Good morning, viewers. My name is Ngozi Egenuka, and welcome to the Guardian Talks. Today, we'll be speaking about ECOWAS and the recently formed Alliance of Sahel States. And we have an expert in diasporic communications. His name is Professor Abiodun Adeniyi. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Okay, so we'll be delving right into this session. Within 2021 to 2023, there were a series of coups in Africa. There's a school of thought that is of the opinion that ECOWAS response to those coups led to the formation of the Alliance of Sahel States. What, in your opinion, sir, is the motivation behind the formation of the alliance?
Well, I think there was a slew of events, international events within the African landscape, that triggered the formation. And those things border around protectionism, around ego, and around the pride of individuals and nations. And of course, when you have that kind of conflict, there's often going to be interventions from forces external to the immediate region when the exchanges and misunderstandings are transpiring. The factor of those forces, global forces, maybe more civilized, more developed countries that are more military, that their sophistication in the military realm is higher, will also have their own part, as the case could be. But overall, we just hope for the better.
Okay, so you spoke about AES being a story that is evolving. We know that even recently, while ECOWAS had its General Assembly meeting, they still made efforts to get the body back into ECOWAS. And I know they had given 29th of January, a time frame that they could still come into the body. But obviously, AES is adamant on continuing the alliance. Do you think there is a future for this alliance? And what role do you think AES can play in regional unity?
First of all, we cannot discount the place of diplomacy, in international politics. Yes, ECOWAS, through Nigeria's presidential chairmanship, made a mistake by saying that they were going to restore democracy in Niger using military force. That was an error. In diplomacy, in international diplomacy, you do not drop your final option at the beginning. Diplomacy is always primary, takes the center stage, considering the interests of the global community, to avoid wars, conflicts leading to destructions, death, and of course, a fundamental retrogression. So diplomacy will definitely continue. ECOWAS will have to continue to rise above the fray, above the seeming adamance of the AES states, and they cannot confront them. They shouldn't talk tough to them. They cannot be aggressive towards them because they have made this stand. They made it more than a year ago, and here we are. They are still continuing with it. Again, it might speak to the question of protectionism, if not to protect their regime, but maybe to protect their country, their citizens, further to the spirit of nationalism that we once witnessed in those countries those days. So we will still continue to see diplomacy from ECOWAS, trying to assuage them. And of course, we have been witnesses to their resistance in the last couple of months. Whether it will be sustainable again is another question. But there are two things that is emerging from here. One, the fear is that is the exiting of these countries born out of a desire to preserve their regime, being military people, and just so they can avoid ECOWAS intervening in their countries, asking them to democratize consistent with the ECOWAS protocol. That's the first question. Then the other one is, will their continuing adamance, lead to development in those countries in the mode of a revolution. And do not forget, there are statistics and indices saying that some of these countries are witnessing growth in their GDP, in their economies. Nigeria, for instance. So if they are making progress exiting ECOWAS, if they are making progress within the context of AES, and then, of course, we can't say that their exit, is not beneficial to the people. And even if we have another regime succeeding them, of course, there could still be stability and sustainability, faced with the reality of progress that the previous military regime made. So that's why I said earlier that it's still a story that is evolving, and how it pans out will depend on a mix of factors. One, on the diplomatic ability of ECOWAS, and second, on the likelihood, the potentials of these countries making economic, political, and social progress towards satisfying the wishes and aspirations of their citizens without necessarily being members of ECOWAS.
Okay, so you spoke about AES being beneficial to the state. And one thing that was also constant after the coups in these countries was the continuous push for an end to neo-colonialism, or France's involvement in these nations. So, sir, what practical steps would you give to ensure, or what practical steps would you give to Africa to ensure that this concept of neo-colonialism ends for good?
Yeah, neo-colonialism is, of course, it has been upon us, and it's still upon us, even in our ways, in our attitude, in our patterns, our particularities, even as individuals, where our thoughts are largely Western, modeled after our former colonialists, and of course, because of the dominance of global media by Western nations, the dominance of international finance capital by Western nations, the dominance of social life, coming in through, media and all such things by Western nations, our thoughts, our behaviors are shaped after after the culture of Western societies. And of course, the disadvantage of history is not also helpful. So we are seeing it reflected in the political realm, where these former foreign colonialists, now industrial powers, are able to exert influence on us, on our governments, and sometimes directly, but most times indirectly. When they are direct or indirect, the only option left for African governments, is to rise and be much more creative and ingenious, looking inwards for development, not relying on Western nations, as the case could be. As the case could be. So, but in this circumstance, these AES countries have come out very boldly to say that they are asking, what do you call it now? They are expelling these foreign powers from their domains. And they have done this successfully. It shows some bravery. But do not forget that while they are doing it on the one hand, they are also cutting other powers. Russia is being courted. Some other countries are intervening in the negative sense in their borders. Ukraine is starting to be funding some rebels, in the Sahel region, which is affecting them, as the case could be. So the contradictions are evolving. You are expelling one and you are cutting the other. So what does all this mean? It simply means that you may not be able to completely do away with the support of some kind of foreign partners, especially in the age of collaboration that we are in, the 21st century, where the world has increasingly become decentered, where things are largely integrated, and of course, where efforts are concerted towards development, eventually towards the satisfaction of citizens' yearnings.
Okay, so do you think embracing a country like Russia in such partnership is a good decision, given that Russia is usually seen as a dictator state?
Russia is a global power. They have influence. They are not a pushover. And whenever they are intervening in any African countries, of course, you know what the motive is. And the motive is to countermand the supposed influence of Western nations, led by the United States, including the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Canada to some extent, etc., etc. And of course, the counterpost to that is also the rise of China, and of course, Japan has always been there. And these countries have grown substantially within their own ecosystem, and they are seeking to externalize influence, and of course, the landscape for this struggle is often Africa. So if they are coming into AES, it's not going to be surprising at the level of military support, as a countermand to Western influence, especially faced with the reality of the open expulsion of France and other Western powers from these AES countries. What it just means is for us to be careful, the AES countries particularly, and they seem to be determined, no doubt, and I remember Professor Patrice Lumumba has described it as described their move as a sort of revolution in the situation where citizens are reluctant to change their government or to force their government to give them good governance. So the military are probably acting on behalf of citizens, to bring about good governance, like we are seeing in Burkina Faso, going by media report. But we also know that democracy is important all the same because it is integrative, it is inclusive, right? And of course, it boosts the self-esteem of the citizen. Well, putting all these together, we will be calling at the end of the day, for peace and tranquility, for the change in the narrative of African countries represented now in the AES countries, so that it may no longer be one of poverty, famine, disease, conflict, but one of progress, development, and good governance.
Okay, so do you still think that because after most of the coups, we saw that those nations, even broke their agreements with France, their defense agreement with France and all that. So, do you think that France's influence in Africa played a role in the limited sovereignty, in the continent, the limited sovereignty practiced in the continent?
Well, France is a world power, no doubt, and he's still very influential. Of course, we saw the other day that our president visited that country, triggering a lot of controversy about our allegiance, whether or not we are really supportive of our own immediate neighbors, against the background of the crisis of confidence that reigns, between Niger and France, and of course we know how some of these things can pan out. Well, my take really is for nations to be strong enough to stand their ground, to be conscientious, to strive towards credibility and integrity. So if these military regimes, can face these values, these virtues, the earlier fears that people have, including myself, against their coming, may be dealt with, may be resolved, as the case could be. But here we are, they are still standing their ground and probably moving forward. Their citizens, are cheering them up. So if all that is happening, then of course, we may not have any other option but to support them, considering that their focus is tailored towards the innate needs of citizens or the innate need of their people, as the case could be.
Okay, one thing that has continued to assail Africa is terrorism. For more than a decade, Africa has been battling terrorism, and ECOWAS being a major bloc in the continent, play some role, to ensure the security of the states it governs. So would you say that ECOWAS has been able to perform this role adequately?
No. There are so many questions that we can ask of ECOWAS. And yes, again, we are talking about these AES countries being military governments. But do not forget, there are three different kinds of coups that do happen. One is a constitutional coup. We have seen many West African countries changing their constitution, only to further themselves in power. We have also seen what do you call it now, electoral coups, where questions can be asked or are often asked around the integrity and credibility of elections. When we see brazen thievery of people's mandates. The third one is the one that we're all familiar with, where military men take over power. So it's not just about military coming into power. Before we talk about coup, the election can also be coup inclined, just like brazen change, brazen alteration of the constitution, for people to sustain themselves in power. So these are downsides, but within the realm of politics, you hardly talk about good and bad in the manner in which Aristotle told us many years ago. And that's why you cannot be too negative about these AES countries. I remember what I said earlier, that having sustained their zeal for over a year or even more, and considering the groundswell of support they are getting from their citizens, and in view of the sacrifices they are obviously making at the level of not getting obsessed with the packs and parasites of office, being people-centric largely, looking more like what Patrice Lumumba called a revolution. And if the revolution like we know it, is changes in government, towards the satisfaction of the yearnings and aspirations of the people, then of course we might be looking in their direction, thinking largely that they are working for not just for the good of their countries, but also for the good of the continent. And it might also be another reason for ECOWAS to review itself, to see whether or not his mandate has been fulfilled, whether his mandate is being fulfilled, and whether or not they are realizing their common objective. One of these objectives is trade. We know cooperation in trade, free movement of peoples, then of course democracy. But questions are also being asked around the kind of democracy we are practicing, even though we know it is integrative, But again, maybe I should just conclude this one by saying that these are things that we'll continue to put in context as the issues evolve.
Okay, sir. Lastly, Nigeria was recently made a partner in BRICS. What role do you think such partnership plays in ensuring that Africa maintains its sovereignty, out of the influence of Western powers?
We're in the 21st century where partnership and collaboration is actually the fact. Yes, we're also in the 21st century, that has brought about the emergence of a Donald Trump, for instance. And we know what Donald Trump is doing, trying to destroy that culture of partnership, pulling out of the climate change agreement, pulling out of WHO, threatening nations, signing a rash of executive orders, and of course provoking other nations to want to retaliate. That's an unfortunate counter narrative of what we imagine partnership and collaboration to be. Within the Nigerian system, there's no reason why we shouldn't strive for a partnership, considering our underdeveloped states and our struggles over the years. Supports are welcome, but what kind of support are we talking about? Is it one that will make us to be Lilliputians, or is it one that will grow us? Is it one that will make us to be obligated to the partner or the collaborator we're engaging in? So as long as the letters of the partnership, is balanced, reasonable, respectful, reputable, there's actually nothing wrong with it. But the danger is that in the past we have gone into some kind of partnership, that undid us, where we were made to pay some fines. And I'm not sure we have even come out of the many crises we ran into in the past, going into some kind of trade partnerships and agreements. But the philosophy of partnership, the philosophy of collaboration is not bad. It is within that context that I will situate the one you described. But what happens is how that partnership is managed. And that's why there's strength in numbers, obviously, especially when the numbers are reasonable. And that's why the AES may not be totally questioned. They may not be totally harassed, because what it is overall is a form of partnership, a form of collaboration towards protectionism. And if you remember, these countries are on the same plane, which international relations scholars we call horizontal. So they have a horizontal relationship. And what do you mean when we talk about horizontal relationship? We're talking about a relationship where nations are at par, at the level of development, at the level of progress, and at the level of meeting the yearnings and aspirations of their people. So to get out of this situation, they now come together, as one, given the commonality of their experience, and of course, from that coming together, they try to foster development, progress, as the case could be. So when nations are on this kind of plane at the level of platform, and they relate better, it is in that light that we can also situate the AES agreement, AES nations coming together. But overall, sustainability is also very important. Peace is also a key cardinal point that we need to focus on.
Thank you so much, sir, for your contributions. We're really glad that you came to this interview with us. And to our viewers, you can drop your opinions on the chat box. I remain Ngozi until we meet another time. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.